There was a line on the map that even the United States military hesitated to cross in the spring of 2003. The Pentagon designated a massive kill box in western Iraq Delta Force, received strict orders to avoid the area entirely. No air support. No medevac. A guaranteed suicide mission yet. Yet while the most powerful army in history held back, another force had already moved in. They were not Navy SEALs or British SAS. They were a ghost unit that had been living in the dirt for weeks before the war officially began. They outsmarted billion-dollar spy satellites armed with nothing more than binoculars and an open-topped Land Rover they captured. Heavily defended fortress with fewer than 50 men in a location the Pentagon had deemed impossible to survive. Who were these bearded warriors? How did they execute what became the greatest special operations heist of the 21st century? Right under Saddam's nose, and why has the full story of the Scud hunters remained hidden until now? Put your coffee down and prepare yourself. You are about to enter the red zone. This is the story the history books neglected. The United States Delta Force's top intelligence analysts finally grasped what was occurring in western Iraq. A chilling silence fell over the briefing rooms. Satellite imagery, supposedly the ultimate truth and powered by billions of dollars in technology, had shown nothing. These orbital eyes, capable of reading license plates from space and detecting thermal signatures through concrete, had repeatedly reported the desert was empty, but on the ground, the sand itself told a different story. Narrow tracks carved into the unforgiving landscape contradicted every assumption made by American military command. These were not Humvee tracks or the wide treads of British armored vehicles. They were precise, surgical impressions of six-wheeled Land Rovers, vehicles specially modified over 20 years for extreme long-range desert operations. Tracks wound deep into territory no conventional force dared approach, weaving between dry riverbeds and crossing exposed plateaus where any movement should have been fatal. They passed former Scud missile positions that had been readied for launch only to be destroyed by airstrikes called in from operators lying just a few hundred meters away. The analysts realized with horror that the Australians had been there the entire time, while satellites saw only sand and rock. These men lived inside the red zone, dismantling Iraq's strategic weapons under the enemy's nose, according to declassified military accounts. The Australian SAS not only survived this lethal environment, they thrived. This extraordinary revelation was only the first shock of a story that defied conventional military logic. The saga begins not in the dust of Iraq, but with a deliberate, strategically significant decision to place Australian soldiers in a zone the world's most powerful military had deemed too dangerous to understand why. We must go back to the weeks before the invasion and examine the intelligence assessments, doctrinal debates, and philosophical differences that determined control of the western Iraqi desert in spring 2003. This was as much a clash of ideologies as a clash of armies, a choice between relying on technological supremacy or trusting the resilience of the human spirit, and that philosophy would prove decisive when soldiers finally met the desert. The western desert of Iraq stretches from the Jordanian and Syrian borders to the Euphrates River Valley. Larger than many European countries, it is a landscape of flat gravel plains, broken by shallow depressions and wadis that become impassable mud traps after rain. Temperatures swing from 40 C in the daytime to near freezing at night. There is no shade, no water, almost nothing to sustain life. Yet the environment itself is a weapon, punishing unprepared forces. The United States Central Command assessed that western Iraq was too remote for small unit operations without catastrophic risk. The nearest logistics base was more than 400 kilometers away, making supply runs a nightmare Medevac helicopters could theoretically reach the area, but weather and enemy defenses made rescue impossible. The region lay completely outside the golden hour radius. The 60-minute window critical to American Special Operations doctrine for wounded personnel Delta Force operators, extraordinary though they were, could not cross this boundary. The decision was made quietly to leave the western desert largely uncovered. By ground forces, the Americans would rely on high-altitude surveillance and long-range missile strikes to handle any threats. This gap could have been disastrous, but the Australians were prepared to exploit it. The Special Air Service Regiment's 1 Squadron had trained for exactly such impossible missions for decades. Regiment at Campbell Barracks in Swanbourne, Western Australia, developed doctrine for long-range desert reconnaissance inspired by British SAS operations in North Africa during World War II. Small groups of highly trained men would penetrate deep behind enemy lines, gather intelligence, disrupt supply routes, and destroy targets while remaining invisible. The Australians refined this legacy, creating a regiment culture based on self-sufficiency and the ability to survive independently in the harshest conditions, while other forces relied on constant resupply, while other units depended on logistical chains and medical evacuation. The Australians trained to disappear into the desert. They believed the most effective unit was not the most technologically sophisticated, but the one most capable of sustaining itself and striking with patience and precision. In 2003, this philosophy gave them a decisive edge. Saddam Hussein's Western Scud missile network, capable of threatening Israel, was hidden across the desert using techniques perfected over years of evasion satellite imagery. Returned inconclusive results because American sensors could not distinguish camouflaged launchers from civilian equipment. The coalition solution was not more technology. It was human eyes close enough to see details satellites could not. A concept Australian veterans call the Mark I eyeball. The irreplaceable ability to observe what machines cannot. On March 18, 2003, while the media focused on the UN and coalition forces in southern Iraq, 1 Squadron SASR crossed into Iraq from Jordan under cover of darkness. They carried no orders for publicity, left no press communications, and simply vanished 2 days before the official invasion. The Australians were already at work, while shock and awe aimed to overwhelm through noise and firepower. The Australians moved quietly, patiently, invisibly. They used long-range patrol vehicles custom-built over decades on 6-wheel Land Rover chassis, stripped of non-essential features to create a lethal, open-topped platform for weapons and communications. The absence of doors and roofs allowed them to hear threats from miles away and maintain full 360-degree vision, giving them situational awareness impossible in enclosed vehicles. Even more critical was what they could do on foot in layup positions. Concealed observation posts established near enemy positions, where hours turned into days without movement or sound. Iraqi patrols could drive within 50 meters and see nothing because there was nothing visible from a moving vehicle. American Special Operations doctrine emphasized immediate action, fire superiority, and rapid engagement. This was effective elsewhere, but the Western Desert required patience, concealment, and human observation. The Australians exploited the failures of 1991 Gulf War intelligence, proving that only men on the ground could locate and neutralize mobile Scud launchers. Patrols studied terrain, routes, and supply networks, establishing posts overlooking bridges, junctions, and storage facilities. They watched every vehicle and every movement until a target was confirmed. The process began not with shooting, but by relaying coordinates via secure radio, designating targets with laser pointers, and calling in precision-guided bombs from aircraft out of range of Iraqi defenses. Launchers were destroyed, crews gone, and the Australians melted back into the desert unnoticed. Saddam had counted on invisibility. He was right about satellites. Catastrophically wrong about the Australians during their 42 days in western Iraq. One squadron eliminated the western Scud threat, prevented attacks on Israel, and maintained coalition cohesion, all without public recognition because much remained classified. Theirs was a sustained, disciplined operation, the result of training, patience, and operational doctrine rather than single acts of heroism. They mastered the red zone, turned deadly terrain into an ally, and showed the enduring value of human observation over high-tech surveillance. One of their most striking operations came on April 16, 2003, at Al-Assad Air Base, 200 kilometers west of Baghdad, a massive facility with runways, hardened aircraft shelters, fuel and ammunition stores. It had been outside the main coalition advance, the Australians, acting on intelligence from weeks of silent observation, knew the personnel, the aircraft, and the enormous weapons stockpiles approaching in open Land Rovers with 40 to 60 personnel. They did not assault the base directly. They called in precision airstrikes, demonstrating total control without destroying the facility. The psychological impact caused Iraqi forces to surrender, and the Australians drove through the gates to secure the base intact, catalog intelligence, and manage prisoners before American forces arrived. Other engagements, such as near Al-Qaim, highlighted their tactical sophistication, using overwhelming firepower and coordinated airstrikes. They neutralized numerically superior forces and disengaged before the enemy could react. Their long-range vehicles and disciplined crews created a firepower and mobility advantage disproportionate to their numbers. Why were they so effective while Americans could not replicate it? Both armies had capable soldiers and equipment. The difference was doctrine. American forces relied on rapid, decisive, supported action shaped by lessons from Mogadishu. The SASR's doctrine accepted risk, relied on self-sufficiency, and emphasized sustained operations in extreme environments. 42 days in the western desert required sleeping in shallow scrapes, ration management, water discipline, vehicle maintenance, and constant operational awareness, only possible through years of specialized training. Australians did not merely survive. They controlled the environment. They found what satellites could not, eliminated strategic missile threats, secured a major airbase, and engaged enemies effectively while invisible to the outside world. Their actions prevented regional escalation, safeguarded coalition cohesion, and neutralized a threat that would have kept leaders awake at night. No media coverage existed. No photographs were taken, but the results spoke for themselves. The Scuds never fell on Tel Aviv. Coalition staging areas were safe, and the war did not escalate. This is the story of the Australians, who went west when everyone else said it was impossible. They stayed for 42 days, performed work that no machine could do, and returned home dusty, bearded, exhausted, yet quietly responsible for changing the course of the war. The zone marked in red on the American map belonged to them. They were the ghosts of the desert, and they claimed it without fanfare, leaving a legacy of patient, disciplined, and lethal operational excellence unmatched in modern military history.